All right, howdy. So welcome to this edition of Fun with Tape Machines. This is another Akai. It is a series or two later than the Roberts 770X, which is also known as an Akai A8, that I've worked on before. It looks a little more modern. As you can see, the amplifiers now are solid state versus tube. And this one, you'll notice, has 4 VU meters because it's a 4-channel. All consumer stereos machines are 4-channel, but how they work them varies. So the usual consumer stereo machine is when you play it forward, it will play tracks 1 and 3 left and right. When you flip the tape over, just like a cassette, you're hearing 2 different tracks, in this case tracks 4 and 2. This machine and a lot of reel-to-reels, because of how much of a kind of a pain it is to flip these reels around and rethread them, actually will play in reverse. And when it plays in reverse, it switches the signal input from tracks 1 and 3 on the head to tracks 4 and 2 for left and right respectively. It's a consumer machine by my definition because it has just 3 3/4 and 7.5 tape speeds, and it only does 7-inch reels. It is a 4-track in that you can play all 4 tracks forward simultaneously. And interestingly, the logic for that will shut off reverse when you're in 4-channel mode, because all you could do in 4-channel mode going in reverse is hear everything backward, which is kind of cool, but not very practical. So it's not really a typical stereo machine in that regard. The other thing is that as opposed to a Pro 4-track, let's lay out some guidelines. A Pro 4-track has individual arm for record buttons, so that you can arm as little as 1 track and as few as 4 tracks for recording at a single time and play back the other 3. On this machine here, you've just got record. So if you hit record and play, you'll record on either both of these tracks, 1 and 3, if you're in stereo mode, or if you go into 4-channel mode, you'll record on all 4 at the same time. There is a feature called sound on sound, which prevents erasure of the previous track and adds your new audio to it, but it's not quite the same in that you can't, like you could say with this 4-track reel-to-reel recording machine, or even this Tascam 4-track cassette over here, you can't just build up like 1 track at a time and then bounce somewhere else. This was meant to be hooked up to a quad stereo receiver so that you would have front and left, right and left, front and rear, right and left. So you have a front set of left and right channels and a rear set of left and right channels. The lights are not dead on these meters. If I turn it into 4-channel mode, you'll see those come on. And what happens then is you're only allowed to play in forward, and if you hit play and record, it will record on all 4 of these at once. So you could, I suppose, record a band 4 tracks at once live to 4-track, and then maybe bounce that down to a stereo machine and come back and do this again. But it's not nearly as tailored toward actual 4-track recording as a Pro machine is. So it's a cool machine. Mostly what's different about it, though, is that both this and the non-surround stereo version have now these logic controls instead of all the levers. That initially seems like a great idea because you can now not have to worry about your levers jamming up or the cams that move things around in there breaking or the wheel from the single motor not making the right contacts and so forth. This is a 3-motor machine, which means it has a little motor here, a little motor here, and a little motor down for the capstan. The downside is that, like all old electronics, and especially electronics from the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, a lot of times they were exposed to a lot of cigarette smoke. And when you've got a machine that is relying on contacts to change the modes versus levers, smoke is actually worse for this kind of a machine than it is a mechanical one. All of the logic for what happens in this machine, whether it's going forward, backward, fast, slow, is decided on what's called a logic board that is about 6 by 9 inches, and it is filled with these relays, not these exact ones, but the same type, which are not sealed, and so they get dirty. And what happens is nicotine is an extremely pervasive, invasive substance, as is smoke. And so it tends to get inside and either cover contacts so that they won't connect, or it sticks them. All of these switches here, the fast and slow for here, the monitor, source or tape, the stereo selector 2 and 4, SRT, something special I won't get into right now. All these pots basically were just all so full of crud that I had to take the front of this apart and clean them all out before they would work at all. The worst problem was the logic board. So you can probably guess, based on the fact that all the forward and back switching and speed and so forth are all chosen by these relays. If something goes wrong with that board, your machine is in a lot of trouble. This one, when I got it, the only thing on it that worked at all was rewind. Well, obviously stop works. I'll give it credit for that. Fast forward, if you fast forward it, what would happen is you would push the fast forward button, but as soon as you let go of it, something would happen in the relay and it would shift into reverse. So you had to be really quick on the stop button if you didn't want it just to reverse your way all the way back out of the tape. Neither of what I'll call the 2 play buttons, forward and reverse, did a thing. And initially I thought it might be the relays. They're replaceable, but they're $11 a piece, and there's a lot of labor involved. So what I ended up doing was pulling the machine out of the cabinet. It's got this nice faux walnut veneer cabinet, as is typical of the era. Pulled it out of the cabinet and found out that the logic board and almost every other connection in this machine, and this is very different from the 60s models, is what's based on connected with what's called an edge connector. So you'll have a wiring harness with a bunch of kind of pins coming down. I wish I had a good picture of one. And what it would do is it fits into a slot real tight. If you've ever opened up a sort of modern PC, you've seen what I'm talking about. You know, memory cards and things like that slip into edge connectors like that. So the big logic board up here slides into a set of edge connectors really hard, and there's a lot of torque that gets put on that board when you do that. Also in the back, all of the wiring connections between the channels and the motors and everything, all the electronics, is on similar edge connectors. So I took the thing apart, and I was able to determine fairly quickly that the switches themselves worked, which was nice. because it was something I could, I could just clean them and ignore. I did that with a continuity tester. Don't go anywhere without a multimeter you can trust and a lot of contact cleaner. And so those worked, and so the problem had to be in the relay board up here. And in fact, I could kind of verify that, because if I torqued on the relay board, because it's just supported by the edge connector at the front and 3 screws at the back, I could get different things to happen. Some of these buttons would kind of start working, some of them would stop working. But I got at least a different behavior. So I took the board off, I pulled the covers off all of these relays and just cleaned the hell out of those contacts here. Those little metal bands that you see there basically pop back and forth to activate or deactivate the relay when they get a certain voltage to them, and that's part of the logic circuit. I cleaned all of those, put it back together, at least enough to see it run, and was still having a lot of problems. So I looked at the board, and there were some indications that it had gotten warm over the years. And another truth about these 70s Japanese-made machines, especially, is that they were using a low-temp solder to let them do robotic soldering. So this is still through-hole components, but robotic soldering a lot of times, instead of a technician sitting there and hitting every spot with a soldering gun, and that's faster. But it also means that if the thing gets hot, and or as likely happened in moving this thing around, some of those contacts come loose or break, stuff stops working right. So the next thing I did was I broke out my trusty soldering station back there, and I pulled the board back out and basically redid all of the solder connections on that board, and there are a lot of them. So a couple of them I had to suck the old solder off. I have a little device that does that, and some of them I just kind of reflowed the solder until it looked like it was nice and clean and shiny, and that worked. But the end result is that now this thing is 100% functional again. I still need to test out some of the quad functionality. I do have an Akai Quad sampler tape that came with it, that I just need to hook it up to something over here in my patch bay so that I can hear all 4 inputs, and then I will give that a try and make sure that all of the outputs work properly. But the meters do all go now. And the switching between stereo and 4-channel still seems to work, and monitoring between source and tape, which would stick a lot, works. So everything basically on it seems to work. So here's what you get. You load it up and you hit forward, and that's your play speed. And again, this is 7.5 IPS, which is what this tape is. There's kind of a quiet section of the tape I'm in, so you don't see a lot of activity, but those meters do in fact work. And in fact, on the 1/4-inch full track calibration tape that I have, you can really see them going, which, by the way, is another tool you absolutely have to have with these machines, because you never know when you're playing these 1960s, 1970s consumer tapes if maybe there's a defect in the tape, something not working on it. And so it's imperative to have a calibration tape you can trust that has all the channels, so you can see all of them working. I use that. I have tapes for every single one of these formats. I've got one for 1/4-inch machines. I've got one for the 1/2-inch machine. I've got a couple of those. I have them for the 1-inch 16 track. I have them for both 2-inch 24 tracks. And they're just invaluable in terms of being able to determine that, in fact, all of the heads are sending signal. which can be a real time saver and save you a lot of frustration trying to figure out whether there's a problem with the head or just the playback. But so you've got fast forward, now works great, play works great. And you notice the logic takes a second for it to figure out what to do. Rewind, watch, count it down to, so it has to figure out, what it all has to switch to go into reverse, and then of course rewind works. So these buttons are now doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it was quite a bit of work to get it there, but it's a 50-year-old piece of electronics, and electronics just don't age that well. I'm kind of deciding that there's sort of a dividing line before about 1970 where stuff just starts getting so old that it isn't reliable anymore on a regular use basis. So that's it for the GX-280DSS. I'm trying to think if I left anything else off of it. It has an auto shut-off, which is nice if you want to just go away or go to sleep with the tape on and not have it play all night. It also has a pause or lock. So if you don't want to hit stop but you want to pause the play, you push this in and then twist it to lock it there. Why you want to do that and leave it against the heads versus just hitting stop, I don't know. But there it is. It has 4 mic inputs, front, left, and right, rear, left, and right. In the back there are also line inputs and outputs, as well as a DIN connector, which there is a wiring diagram in the manual for this that tells you what they do. And then this is kind of a pain. Does anybody know if they made actual quad headphones, maybe with 2 sets of jacks? Because I really would like to be able to listen to both of these just with the headphones when I've got it sitting over here versus over this way closer to my recording rig. Right now what I have to do is drag it over here and plug it into 4 things on my interface so that I can actually hear all the channels. But that's it. Just intended to be a little bit of a run through of the machine and how it works, and that's all there is to it. I will see you next time. I will do a demo on another Akai that I have and worked on, although it was much less troubled. And it is getting really close to a pro machine. It has, I think it's still just 3 3/4 and 7.5, but it does do 10-inch hubs, which means, or reels, which means that you can put these hub adapters and 10-inch reels on the machine. And it came with a couple of tapes, most of which is partial songs taped off the radio. But it has also some nice updates in the 630. And this one here, when I go to clean the heads, I actually either have to take this cover off to see what I'm doing, or I have to get way under here and kind of try to look up with a light while I'm doing it, because they're not as easy to get to as some of the other ones where the covers just pop off or they lift up, etc. So anyway, that's it for this one, and look for the GX630D next. Thanks.